So I'm 100% with you on that very real possibility that they were something other than Watchers, a progenitor race possibly. Um, I have to also wonder at as when because like you said, we see the Nephilim described as giants. Like we have key passages that describe them as being tall as cedars, people great and tall. I believe it's Deuteronomy actually describes them as being a people with cities fortified unto heaven, people great and tall, sons of the Anakim, whom you know, of whom you've heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak. I have to wonder though, at as you get further removed from the progenitor tribes and you have more mixing with human DNA and there's dilution of bloodlines inside there, just how small those giants go from being to
Well,
being
I mean, to go from being, let's say, like Og
short.
of Bashan,
Yeah.
12 foot tall, let's say, to being 4 foot tall, that's quite a transformation.
Well, yeah, and I guess my reason for bringing this up was we see the Bible talking about iniquity of the fathers being visited upon the third and fourth generation. We also know that according to the Jewish culture, that a bastard could not enter into the assembly until the 10th generation, which is where we have the house of Perez, and then we finally have David being the son of Jesse. So I wonder though, because we have now, we'll take the Philistines, for example. We know according to the Bible, and I actually did a video on this where it breaks down their entire lineage as far back as I could find it. We know that they were a Nephilim tribe, and yet they have this champion, Goliath, who, depending on which one of the cubits used to measure him, he's somewhere between 9'4" to like 11 foot 6 inches tall. It doesn't describe many of the other Philistines around him as being gargantuan. I would imagine that some of them were. And them becoming smaller in size as the generations go on, I don't think that would take away from them still having some of those innate powers, if you will, or abilities.
There were still giants, though, in every case. And in fact, you can find a lot, and this is a different conversation, but you can find a lot of evidence of giants, anecdotal evidence of giants that were alive not that long ago in Sardinia.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all of gigantic stature, anywhere from 8 to 12 feet tall.
Yeah, and this is all predicated upon, we're talking specifically with dilution of bloodlines. Like I would have to imagine that if you have tribes still saying within their own family line, like that DNA, that gigantic nature just being passed on and passed on and passed on.
Certainly there's going to be a delusion of those genetic traits, but I don't think it's going to result in 4 foot tall gnomes with elongated skulls and large orbital sockets. That's something different. And now there is this generalization of the term Nephilim, and the term has become quite amorphic, in that it's kind of lost its explanatory power, because in the beginning, and when I say in the beginning, I mean going all the way back to the ancient Hebrews, the term meant giants. That's what Nephilim were. They were giants. There's a prevailing notion now, there's an idea that's propagated widely on the internet, that Nephilim not only means giant, it also refers to any kind of hybrid. But that's a new definition. That is a concocted definition, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but it's not accurate. It does not reflect the meaning of the term. The term, indeed, is derived from an Aramaic transliteration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, the word Nephilim does not mean the fallen ones. It does not derive from Nephal, to fall. The late Dr. Michael Heiser wrote an excellent article on this, and I think he's absolutely right. It derives rather from a transliteration of an Aramaic word, which is very similar. And that Aramaic word simply means giants. And so the word Nephilim was adopted from the Aramaic. It did not derive from the Hebrew Nephal. It was adopted from the Aramaic, and it means giants, not to fall, or fallen ones. It means giants. And support for this rendering comes from the Septuagint, where we find the term Nephilim rendered as gigante or gigante, which means giant. And in fact, the Greek term, the Greek word, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Greek word for giant, also has the additional connotation of earthborn.
Yep.
So in the Greek, it's even more specific. These are earthborn giants. That's who the Nephilim are. And the earthborn part is very intriguing, because the giants are the terrestrial offspring of extraterrestrial beings. That's what they are.
What's fascinating about the earthborn, just as an aside, when you look back into Greek lore and Greek mythology, and you look back into Greek stories, the only other place that I found, or I should say the earliest place going back aside from the Bible where earthborn is used. So I had a conversation with Ken Ami about this, and this was following a debate I saw with him and Gary Wang, where he was stuck on gigantes, meaning earthborn, and therefore not meaning giant. However, you look at the story of Jason and the Argonauts, where they run in specifically with the earthborn, and these guys were described as being able to hurl boulders. We're talking like VW bug sized boulders at these guys. Also, they're described as, once they were slain, laying up on the shore of the ocean that they had just sailed over across, or the sea that they just sailed over across, laying up on the shore, very high up onto the shore, with their feet way down into the water. So we do understand those to, as you said, be gigantic.
Gigante definitely means giant in Greek. There is no, among scholars, there is no argument on that fact. It is,
and I'm 100% with you there.
It means giant. And so the word, the term Nephilim definitely means giant. And so to enlarge the definition of Nephilim is to lose the meaning of the word and its explanatory power. In other words, if it no longer just applies to giants, then all bets are off. It could literally be anything. It could be anything and everything bizarre, unusual, anomalous. And that's kind of the way that term is applied today. Gray aliens are Nephilim. The elongated skull, the Paracas culture are Nephilim. Fairies are Nephilim. I mean, everything's a Nephilim. And when everything is a Nephilim, then nothing's a Nephilim. That's the problem. You lose the explanatory power of the word, the identifying attribute of the being is that it is a giant. And so I would not apply the term Nephilim to the Paracas elongated skull race. And I say race to differentiate the members within that culture who are representative of a genetic species, rather than whose craniums, whose elongated craniums, are the result of a genetic deviation or alteration or modification, however you want to view it, in contrast to the many skulls, which are clearly the result of cradle headboarding. Because, as I said before, both of these things are present in the skulls. And you can see, Chase Kletsky actually pointed this out to me, when there's cradle headboarding, you can actually see the markings on the skull in many cases. You can see the result of the bandages, the bindings, and the boards. You can see the imprints on the skull in many cases, not in all cases. And many of the skulls do have those imprints. So you are looking at, when you pull up Paracas elongated skulls and you get all those images that you get on Google Images, understand that many of those are in fact the result of cradle headboarding, but some are likely not. And again, that is, and I know this is a term that's overused, but that rewrites history, as my colleague Eli Marsuli would say. That rewrites history. And by the way, if people who are listening are not familiar with LA's analysis, his research on the elongated skulls and his DNA extraction, go watch his films, go read his book, because I think his work is unimpeachable. Mondo Gonzalez was involved in that, an archaeologist, a superb archaeologist, as I mentioned earlier, Chase Kletsky, and a host, and a handful of other very professional and intelligent individuals from various disciplines, and they just did a phenomenal job. And what they discovered was that the Paracas, although we don't know who the fathers are, and that's a very, very important piece of the puzzle, because we have no nuclear DNA, they discovered that the Paracas culture, genetically speaking, is definitely not from Peru. In fact, their results indicate that we're probably looking at a culture that migrated from the Middle East, or there's various, markers, genetic markers there. It's not just the Middle East; it's also parts of Europe, and there's different haplogroups involved there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we did our own analysis. We took our own sample with Chase in LA, and during our investigation, and we discovered the same. We discovered the same non-Peruvian origin in regard to the results that the sequence, the data that we were able to obtain through the genetic sequence. And in fact, it adds a little bit more, I think, a little bit more definition, a little bit more resolution to the question. But you'll have to watch the film
Sure.
if you want to see what I mean by that.